The following are 6 true stories from the spirit world received via a telephone. Mrs. Baker. In April 1985, a woman by the name of Mary Culthorpe was working for a telecommunication company and was hoping to close a sales call to a residential number in Pennsylvania. The call had been answered by what sounded like an older woman who identified herself as Mrs. Baker. Mary immediately began following her usual sales script technique that she had used on many occasions and asked the woman who her current telecom provider was. The woman informed her that she and her husband were with AT&T. At this stage, Mary sensed that she was close to gaining a new customer. But just as she believed that she was closing the deal, the woman started to relent, stating that she and her husband were lifelong and loyal AT&T customers and did not want to change providers. Not to be deterred, Mary inquired whether she could speak with her husband. The woman advised Mary that he was unavailable at that time, as he'd recently retired and was out fishing. The reason Mary had persisted with the phone call was because it had been previously noted that the couple had been unhappy with what was being charged by the existing provider. So Mary then agreed to make a time to phone back. The following evening, she rang the couple at their prearranged time, and on this occasion it was a male voice that answered the phone. However, upon identifying herself, the conversation quickly became uncomfortable, with the man stating that he did not appreciate cold callers trying to sell him things he had no interest in buying. Mary was used to being rebuffed by reluctant customers and had apologised for the intrusion and stated that there must be some misunderstanding, as she had spoken to the man's wife the day before and they had agreed on an approximate time to call back. For a few moments the line remained silent. Then the man became angry, stating that the reason he had not been home that day before was because his wife had died the previous week and had been at her funeral. Then he hung up. Light in the sky. A woman was travelling through Nebraska one evening and observed the strange light in the sky that proceeded to follow her car for nearly 2 hours. Just as she arrived home, her phone began to ring, and a man then spoke to her on the other end of the line. The man had a metallic tone to his voice and identified himself as Roger. When the woman informed him that she didn't know anyone by that name, he told her that he was her brother and then hung up. The woman, who had been an only child, ignored the incident, believing it was a wrong number. A few years later, the woman learned that long before she was born, her mother had given birth to a stillborn baby boy. Had he survived, would have been named Roger. She couldn't help feeling that the sighting of the strange light and the subsequent phone call was somehow related. Fact remains that these instances are so commonly reported throughout the world from witnesses across multiple communities and backgrounds that it seems almost cynical to simply pretend they do not happen. If the spirits of the dead can manifest themselves physically to their loved ones, leaving no trace of their appearance, then why should they not be able to do the same in utilising technology? So do we assume that the object that proceeded to follow her in the car was not extraterrestrial in nature, but possibly spiritual? The fact that she received a call from her brother from the spiritual realm means that the light that followed her car was possibly an orb. Edie. One day in 1978, a woman by the name of Madeline White returned home from work one evening to be told by his son, John, that her old friend of hers called Edie had phoned her. Madeline told her son that she hadn't seen or spoken to her friend Edie for several years. However, the following day her son told her that Edie had called again. Madeline asked her son if she had left the number, and he told her that she hadn't, but that she said that she would call back the following day. Edie called again, and when her son John asked for a phone number so that his mother could phone her back, the woman simply said that it doesn't matter. Now rather concerned, Madeline phoned a mutual friend, who gave her Edie's number. When Madeline called the number, Edie's husband answered the phone. When Madeline asked to speak to Edie, she was met with a stony silence. He told her that Edie had died 3 days ago of a cerebral hemorrhage. After that, Madeline never received another phone call from anyone called Edie. The phone calls stopped the day after she was buried. During every phone call, Madeline had no idea that her friend Edie had been dead the whole time. The disconnection. In the 1970s, Brian Wright explained how he and his grandmother would often walk together into town and back. However, his grandmother had the bad habit of leaving her doors open. On one occasion, his grandmother's phone bill appeared to be much higher than usual, so she put in a request to have her phone lines disconnected, as she believed that someone had been entering her house while she was out and were making phone calls. So a short time later, her phone was disconnected. However, early one night, she received a phone call from a friend, Lizzie Bartlett, in West Virginia, and the friend told her that she was going away, but that everything was all right and that she could only say a few words, and that she would hear about it in a few days. Understandably, this totally confused his grandmother as to why she'd received the phone call when it was supposed to be disconnected. When Brian and his grandmother contacted the operator for an explanation as to why this happened, he reassured them that it had indeed been disconnected and pointed out that the wire had not only been disconnected to the pole, but had also been disconnected to the house, meaning that the phone connection had been broken in 2 places. 3 days later, his grandmother received a letter from Lizzie's family explaining that her friend Lizzie had died on the night before they sent the letter. However, the phone call that her friend had made was impossible because when she'd actually received the phone call, her friend Lizzie was already dead, and the call had come from a disconnected line, so it appears to have come from beyond the grave. Dead phone. In 2009, Dr. John Coombs claimed to have received a series of paranormal text messages whilst working in his office. It came from an old mobile phone which had been abandoned in an office drawer and had been unused for several years, and had somehow turned itself on and left a text message. The message simply read, "Remember the anniversary." Then at a later date, it left another text message which said, "Remember the birthday." The first text message was received the day before the anniversary of Dr. Coombs' son's death, and the second text was received the day before the anniversary of his mother's death. However, there was no information as to who the sender was or where the message had been sent from. But the major question to be asked was, how can a mobile phone that had had no power for several years suddenly turn itself on? And to add even more mystery to the story, the old phone did not even have a SIM card, meaning that it should not even been able to send or receive information. A network provider would state that this is impossible. Could it be that as technology advances, especially in electrical technology, the spirit world is able to access another medium through which to send messages to the living? Maybe sending a text message from the other side is an easier form of communication rather than exchanging actual words via a spirit medium. Charles Peck. On September the 12th, 2008, a train in Los Angeles collided with a freight train where 25 people lost their lives in the collision. One of the passengers on the train was 49-year-old Charles E. Peck, who was on his way to a job interview. After the fateful collision, his partner, stepmother, brother, sister and son all started to receive phone calls from Peck's phone. However, when they answered, all they could hear was static. When they attempted to return the calls, it went directly to voicemail. In total, 35 calls were made from Peck's phone to his family. Rescuers were initially excited, believing that Charles Peck may still be alive and was too injured to speak. When the rescuers eventually found the body of Charles Peck, they said that he had died instantly on impact, so there was no way he could have been calling his family. Later, when the coroners examined his body, they found no signs that he had initially survived the impact in order to make phone calls. The final call from Peck's phone came at 3:28 a.m, but his time of death was 4:22 p.m. the previous day, which means that when the calls were made, he was already dead.